Hey, good morning. Welcome to the Coffee Break Podcast. Our mission here is to share business practices, ideas, and strategies while we enjoy our morning cup of coffee. I am Chad Lingefeld from Loc-Doc Security, and today we are excited. It was inevitable. At some point in time, we were going to have this type of podcast, but it only took us 26 episodes to get here. Today, we're talking all things coffee with Chris Berger from Sugar Creek Coffee Roasters, and we're going to get to that in just a few minutes right after Chris hits that intro.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. Time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
Hey, welcome back. We are excited today. We've already been chatting here just a few minutes before the podcast, and I think this is going to be a really cool one today. It's going to be talking about coffee and communication because Chris is a unique individual. He's got a pretty cool side hustle happening, but he's also... And that's your other job. Your primary is the roaster, right?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
He's got a couple of different things happening, and so one of the cool things we're going to talk about in a little while is kind of communication in a corporate environment.
Right.
I think that's going to be very valuable, and we're going to talk a lot about coffee. Before we get into all of that, though, we do 5 rapid fire questions to get to know you a little better.
Great.
And I don't prepare the guests for this because I like it to be very organic.
I love it. Let's do it.
So, number one, what book are you reading right now?
Let's see. Book I'm reading right now.
Or a podcast you're listening to, something that you're growing with.
I am reading Start With Why. That is a really good one. And I think that really gets into some of the change management things of really explaining why you're doing things before you really get into the weeds of it.
Very good. That whole movement is pretty wild.
Yeah.
That's a fun topic as a whole. How many cups of coffee do you drink in a day?
Oof. I would say at least 3, maybe 4 or 5, depending on kind of the craziness of the day.
Yeah.
But I would say at least 3.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good number. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
I am more a night owl than a morning person.
Really?
Yeah. That's why coffee.
There you go. If you could instantly be an expert on any subject, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That is a good one. Instantly an expert. I would have to go back to just communications, just more. I'm always a learner, and just anything communications, if I could know the ins and outs of everything and the psyche of people, that's really the interesting thing for me, more the psychology behind it.
And a side note, that is cool to be a student of the thing that you're doing, right? Like to not be like, this is what I do. I'm an expert at it already, but be a student in that mindset all the time.
I'm always amazed, 20 years in, the things that, and I think about going back 20 years ago. I remember being young and dumb and thinking, I know this stuff. And some of my first 2 or 3 jobs and just being arrogant about it. And now realizing here I am 20 years later, and there are still things that come up that I'm learning all the time, that better ways of addressing things, better ways of communicating. It's definitely a continual learning process.
Cool. And last question, probably the most important. Milk chocolate or dark chocolate?
Dark chocolate, definitely. That's not even a question for me. Dark chocolate for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for running through that with us. It's always fun to get to know people a little better. So let's do a little introduction,
Sure.
Who you are and kind of how we have arrived at this conversation. I'm a big fan of origin stories and trying to figure out what happened. But this podcast, the Coffee Break Podcast, has been really fun to meet new people. It's been an avenue just to meet new people and
Sure.
then learn. Always want to learn something from the conversation. So give us a quick little introduction as to who you are.
Yeah, so I have a pretty interesting childhood. I grew up in Holland. My first language was Dutch. I went to a Dutch school. My dad was in the military, and I lived there. And I thought I was Dutch until we moved from Holland to the United States in 5th grade and was unceremoniously transplanted into the world of Phoenix, Arizona. So you can imagine going from Dutch, weather, climate,
Wow.
culture, and everything to Phoenix, Arizona, and that was a major shock to me. But I grew, and that's where I ended up honestly, that was my first sip of coffee. I can remember
in Phoenix.
In Holland, climbing up on my mom's lap and tasting, her coffee, and I was in love with that. And I always think about that like moment. I can think about it like right now. And but so that's what we after that we pretty much grew up 3 years in different places. Moved from there to from Arizona to Germany, spent some time in Germany again, and then from Germany to Louisiana, back to Florida, from Florida to North Carolina, went to school in Oklahoma.
It's been all over the place.
So everywhere, yeah. So
and then you landed in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yes, I did.
So
and we love it.
What brought you here?
So I used to work for Walmart in their corporate office, and they sent me here to start a global shared service center for them.
Okay.
And so I was in charge of the training, communication, everything basically to make a center run. And it was their first center outside of Bentonville, Arkansas, that they had done anything like that.
Gotcha.
So it was a big deal for them doing a startup. They had to go where the talent was. And this is where the talent was, being banking center and things like that.
Interesting.
And they were consolidating pretty much all the things that were happening in a store, in the back office of a store, to reconcile the books. And they were doing that in one facility. And so got that. I was first of like 5-10 people. And when I left, there were over 1,000. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So Walmart, you had that whole adventure there. And then your current position, you're with Atrium Healthcare, which is a large...
Yeah, so Atrium Health is, one of the largest integrated systems here in the Southeast. Over 50 hospitals now. We just had Navicent Health, which is down in Georgia, Georgia join us. And so, it is a large integrated system that basically provides a wide variety of world-class services that people travel from all over the world to make sure that they're getting the best care in the world. So. And I lead the corporate communications area. So I have a great team that I work with to basically share the Atrium Health story.
Cool. And I want to come back to that later on in our conversation and talk really about change management, because that's something that I am just overly intrigued with right now. And so hopefully I can learn something from that process of how to communicate change within an organization. So we'll come back to that. But before we do that, I really want to dive into the coffee thing. So, obviously our podcast is named the Coffee Break Podcast. And just a quick origin story. The reason why we went down that path is because, and we kind of hit on it a little bit before we went on, but we had put a coffee machine in our office, an espresso machine, and we were doing pour-overs and doing all kinds of stuff. And we just kind of found this neat organic conversation populating in our office space of ideas and man, we should try this. And it just opened up this whole kind of philosophical debates and, who has the best hamburger and, maybe this new process that we need to implement in our business all over the place. And we said, this is information that I think we could communicate externally as well that is very beneficial. And so that was the whole startup of the thing. And so it's always been surrounded by coffee. We've just been enamored with it, different brews, different roast, and different ways to make coffee for a long period of time. And so it's a huge kind of it's a huge hobby of ours. So to have you here to talk more about the actual science behind it is going to be really cool. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved into the coffee.
Yeah, so about 20 years ago, I was trying to find some good coffee, and I also do home brewing. So I was trying to find some good coffee to make a good home brew beer with. Yeah, I couldn't really find anything, and so I'd been looking online and found a little small air roaster. Yep. And started air roasting, and one thing led to the next, and the more I did that, the more neighbors would come over for coffee, and just like you said, coffee has that natural ability to bring people together. Yeah. And so I fell in love with that concept as well, and as neighbors were asking where could I get some of this coffee, I was like, well, I do it, and it just started picking up from there. Neighbors, friends, others. And it really grew into something that I was like, well, this might be something I could just do on the side and have some fun with. Yeah. And so being back when I first started, I started doing marketing and branding and all this type of things that basically promote businesses. And I said, well, if I'm going to do this, and that's probably one of my personalities, I try to do it very passionately.
Sure.
And so I got involved and basically had a logo designed and worked with a designer and just kind of went through the whole process to make it legit and do an LLC and all those type of things, and then end up getting a commercial roaster.
Yep.
And having the space approved by the Department of Ag here in North Carolina, and it's just been a fun thing since then. That's kind of it's still a hobby, but it's like you said, it's a side hustle.
Yeah.
And it's really great because at night or on the weekends, it allows me to kind of decompress, quite honestly, get my mind off of work.
Yeah.
That I'm currently on, and then kind of do this coffee roasting thing, and you really need your all senses working in order to roast, to get that artisan, kind of feel of what you're actually brewing. And I do a small batch. That's what I always say, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So what really is kind of driving that thing now? I mean, you got into it for the home brew, and now, but it's obviously evolved into something else for you. What's kind of continuing that motivation?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things for me. I mean, one, it allows me to have just an outlet. I really worried when I first started doing it that it would be, sometimes you hear stories about people that they had a hobby that they turned into a business.
And then they hated it.
And the great thing is I've not had that happen. It's been opposite. I'm passionate about kind of like, okay, what's next? Like, what is the, what's the trend? What's the next trend? And looking at things, and it's been just a lot of fun. So the motivation for me is just really hearing the great stories about people that enjoy coffee as much as I do, enjoying the different flavors that they're experiencing that they might not have known was even possible through a coffee. And then just learning about coffee in general. Most people it's amazing. What their perception of coffee is maybe one of the more popular, coffee places around. And then they realize there's a whole new world. And I think that's when they also get excited about it, and they can. It's just real neat when people come to that realization.
Well, it's a cool process because, and we were talking about it the other day. I think Chris mentioned it. When you go to a coffee shop now, it's not just about the cup of coffee; it's about an experience. And so you've got a place to hang out. You've got a place to connect with others.
Yeah.
And the really good coffee shops actually have really good coffee as well. So, I mean, you can have a coffee shop without good coffee and still draw people in by the environment. But when you have both, a good environment and a good coffee, it's something, next level. It's very exciting.
That's right. And one of the things that I found really interesting is at one point I was like, man, I would love to have a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And because of the gathering place and all those type of things that you talk about. But for me, what I've found is my niche really would be supplying coffee places and then creating those relationships.
Yeah.
Because that's a totally different thing. And that's been a lot of fun.
You just get to supply it and then go drink it wherever
you want. That's right. That's
Here,
exactly right.
I brought my own beans. Just go ahead and roast this up.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. So what are some of the things that if a coffee novice that's just kind of getting out, what are some things that they need to be mindful of when you're talking about being aware of roast? Because if you go to the grocery store, I know you guys do a lot of online e-commerce stuff. People can go to your website and purchase it. But when they're looking at all these, even on your website, you've got several different roasts.
That's right.
How do you differentiate between the light, medium, and dark, and all the different tones?
Yeah, I think it's really individual preference. I mean, what has happened, I think, because so many people have grown up on over roasted beans. That's
a nice way to say that.
That is. That they have actually that is the flavor profile that they like the most, and so until they really change that flavor profile or their personal preference, there's no problem with it. I mean, the consumer, give them what they want.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the things that I usually start with when I'm talking about coffee is most people don't know that they are actually seeds. They're not beans, they're seeds. And there's two seeds usually in a cherry fruit, and they come in a shrub. They're in a shrub basically that grows. You think about the equator. all around the equator, that's where this coffee grows.
Sure.
And so, and so it's really neat to see that process. And they grow into red cherries. And actually, the cherry themselves that's a drink. And some places sell that as kind of a tea.
Yeah.
And so that's really neat. I mean, so most people, when they start thinking about, oh wait, that coffee isn't actually a bean. And yeah, you grow coffee by taking that bean and replanting it,
Yeah.
It's a seed that you take. And so anyways, once you get kind of people understanding that it's a little different and it's green,
yeah,
and then it has to be roasted. That's how it gets that color. And then the different varieties. And you have, I love taking people through the whole roasting process, and when they can actually see it and hear the roasting process and see it churn from a green to a yellow to a cinnamon color, and then it goes into first crack. And then I personally think where you're going to get most of your flavor. And each bean, the cool thing about coffee is each bean has a very specific flavor depending on what area of the country or world it was grown in.
Sure.
All of that depending on acidic, content of the soil, the volcanic ash, whatever that was there.
Yep.
All of those type of things. The altitude has a impact on it. And all of those things come together, and each bean has a roast preference that it actually prefers that would get the most flavor out of it. What a lot of, I'd say, large chain coffee places do is because they have to serve coffee to millions of people, they have to actually burn the flavor out of it to homogenize that coffee. So they buy coffee from wherever they can get their hands on it.
And just try to make it all taste the same.
That's it. And so they actually burn out the flavor profile that makes that bean special. And that's what I'm trying to accentuate. I'm trying to accentuate the actual flavor in that specific bean from that part of the world.
That's very interesting. We've had that conversation a lot. There is a large national chain that we will not mention that
Right.
that's like, and I used to be addicted to it. And then once you get opened up to other roasts, it's like, this tastes burnt and nasty, So now going back to that, you said that a lot of people have developed a flavor profile based off of over roasted coffee. So
That's right.
You're saying from a light, medium, and a dark roast, as the dark roast is more of a burnt roast.
For those that buy at like a grocery store, I find that they are content with burnt coffee. And those that like specialty coffee, which is what we're in the kind of the area of specialty coffee, they prefer the more medium roasts.
Gotcha.
So there are some beans, though, like a Sumatra or, that area of the country, Indonesian, that actually the bean tastes much better when it's darker roasted.
Yeah.
So that's what I usually try to work with people on their flavor profile. If they come to me and say, hey, I like it really dark. It's like, okay, let's find a bean that actually can accentuate some of those flavors at the dark side.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. This is probably a conversation that could go on for hours and hours and hours. For that specific information, and as far as being able to get a hold of some of your roast, tell the folks where they can get a hold of you.
Sure. So sugarcreekcoffee.com. That's the site, and you can find out more about us, the different people that we support, and it's a really cool. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed with it is we're using it to support lots of different ministries, different things out there that are already existing. It's just a really neat way to help others out, and I'm blessed with this because I don't. It like I said, it's still a hobby for me.
Sure.
It's not my full-time gig, and and so people can go there, look at the different roasts. One of the cool features I added to the order option is you can order light, medium roast depending on how you like your coffee.
Gotcha.
If you want to let me choose as the roaster, there's a selection on there where you can actually choose to basically say, hey, roast it at a roaster's whatever the roaster thinks that coffee
Roaster's
should be
preference,
at.
yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's pretty cool. So it's very custom, small batch type coffee.
100%. That's my whole deal. It's like I will work with whoever In the Charlotte area, you get free delivery. In the outside of the Charlotte area, it's a small shipping fee, and I'll, you tell me how you liking it. If you like it a little darker, I'll make that note, and next time you order, it'll be a little darker. So very artisanal and very, custom small batch for each person.
And that's what we're actually drinking this morning. So made a siphon brew for you. I've got a pour over. And what is the bean that we're on now?
This is from Honduras. It's an organic. I'm slowly trying to switch everything over to organic just because, that's another small little known fact is that coffee is actually one of the more pesticide and laden things out there, just because you think about those third world countries, which are around all the equator. They're trying to yield as much out of their crop as possible. But if I can find organic that tastes really good at a good price, then I'm trying to switch over to that.
All right, so let's switch hats.
Sure.
All right, so we're going to switch hats off of the coffee roaster. As much as I want to talk about that forever and ever, I think there's another conversation that's going to be really impactful as well. So in your corporate gig, your daily job, you are managing communication for a large corporation. In this sense, it's a hospital. But I think that from some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, there's some things that are irrelevant of the industry, but they're practices that are impactful when it comes to communicating internally within your organization and communicating your story externally.
Yeah.
So I would like to dive into it a little bit. One of the things that you list on your LinkedIn profile, and I've seen a couple other places, is that you are in charge of change management. Yeah. So define change management for our listeners.
So change management, in the simplest terms, is really sharing the right message to the right group of people at the right time. And I would now add a third or fourth part in there with the right channel or right delivery mechanism.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a really big component right now that a lot of companies are missing. They're sharing the right message. They're sharing it at the right time. They're doing the cascade right, and they're using the right people. The problem is they're not actually reaching, especially with millennials, they're not reaching them with the right modality. So it is a very important thing. But basically, it's getting people, when usually the higher up in a company you go, and that's where the decisions are made, right? The decision is made, and then let's implement this big, wide sweeping change or whatever, or even a small change. Let's just talk about an organizational change of some type of announcement where we're saying this leader is going to be moved over here, or this leader is no longer going to be here, whatever.
Or new process or whatever.
Exactly. That message goes out, and it's really, how do you help get your team to be able to function better than it was even before that announcement came out, or at the very least at the same level?
So it's interesting, and to kind of talk into, I think, where you're headed with this, I had this realization, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago of I would get really ramped up about a new idea that we were going to be implementing, and it had been something we'd been working on behind the scenes for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we would have a team meeting about it, and I'd be like, all right, this is what we're going to do. Cool. Everybody's excited, and walk out of the room, and then a day later everybody's forgotten what I said.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this was the coolest thing ever, you know? And you were mentioning something about that earlier. Why is that the case?
Well, what happens is you are the one that's most excited about it, or you're the one most familiar with it. And every person, and this was getting to before with, I would love to know more about the human psychology and everything that's I'm kind of a student of right now, is the... everybody goes through a change curve, and it's scientific. It's absolutely proven. It's like the stages of grief, so to speak. But it's basically when an announcement is made, everybody kind of starts with the understanding of what's happening, and then they go through comprehending it in their mind and thinking about, how does this affect me? How does this affect my team? How does this affect my family? And go through all those things, and that actually leads to kind of a valley, and that valley is, kind of, you're going through like all these thoughts in your mind. And until you can grapple with everything and kind of come to grasp with what's happening and come out of that valley, then you're on the upswing. What typically happens is the ones making the announcements, the zone on leadership positions, already on the other side of that valley. They're actually on a mountain high, because they're gung-ho at this point. Yeah. They've gone through it. They're on the high. They're ready to charge. But their people are in that valley, and that's where the disconnect is, because they haven't done a good job of going, that whole explaining the why.
Yep.
They haven't done a good job of explaining the why, and they haven't done a good job of connecting why this isn't really important for everyone. And the job really with change management is to get them to that curve as soon as possible so that they can end up being on that mountain high with them and charging and getting whatever they need to do. Company profits hugely impacted by this a lot of times because people absolutely are stuck in that valley and nobody helps them get them out.
So what are some practical things that people can do to help that process and help walk people through that valley?
Yeah, I think that's where communication comes in. I mean, a lot of times what it ends up being is just very practical communication through lots of different forms. This is what I was talking about earlier of it depends on that new, like I really feel like with large corporations, if you have some type of employee app, that's huge because you can share those stories. You can share the successes that you're already seeing, and they have it in their hand, and you can push notification just like you would if you were as part of any other app. You can do lots of things like that.
So essentially what you're saying is taking practical stories of how it's been implemented or where the success is happening in that implementation so that you can really digest it as how it applies to me.
Yeah, and I think it's at different levels too because the message has to be tailored to each audience. So if you're a supervisor, you want to know how you can talk to your team. So it's really important to be able to first get the message to supervisors, let them chew on it. And that's typically when you talk about a communication cascade in change management, you want to get with the supervisors first to help them get through that change curve fast, right? Then they can share that message with their team. And so it's a progression of getting everybody through that as fast as possible.
So let me ask you a question on this from a communication standpoint, because you've been in this world for a long period of time. One of the things that I've been intrigued with is the way that people receive information, and one of the ways that I've kind of laid it out from my perspective, and I'd be interested on your thoughts on it, how you've seen it in play. But people typically have been receptive to either verbal communication, written, or visual. And very oftentimes it's only one of those three. So when you're communicating to a vast audience, how do you address the different ways that people, because if you just write a press release document, you're not going to hit everybody in the loop.
That's right.
How are you addressing all the different ways of communicating?
I think it is a matrix of communications. That's the best ones that need to happen. With my teams, I call it a time and action plan, a TAP. Everybody's like, need a TAP for this? I was like, yes, we need a TAP for this. I'm very process driven. So it's but it's a time and action plan. So it clearly lists out the sequence of events and how, and it's never that's the problem with a lot of times they're thinking, okay, I sent the memo out. Why didn't everybody get this?
Yeah.
Verbal communication is going to beat all types of communication, right? It is absolutely needed, but not all supervisors are going to feel comfortable sharing a message that maybe the CEO is delivering. So it's really important that the CEO stay at the right level and share the information, and then other people kind of get into the weeds of what that actually means.
Okay.
And then going down from there. But I would say town halls, if you're a smaller company, just that verbal, here's what this means for you specifically, that start with why is really important. Why is the change important? Because I think once people can grasp their mind of, okay, this is why we have to do this, they can get behind it.
So I think you bring a very valid point. Some of the things that we've seen successful in our organization is when we're going to implement a change and we get a hold of kind of a core leadership team and we say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing, get feedback, kind of process that through, and then we go, okay, so we've now agreed this is the action that we're going to take, and let that simmer for maybe a couple of days or a week.
Yeah.
And then once the announcement is made more widespread, then, and I think this is kind of what you're saying, I'm just processing it through on a practical small business application, that core leadership team then can say to the people that they're directly involved with, so this is what was said and this is what it means.
That's exactly right. And I think being available to answer the questions is so important because everybody's going to have tons and tons of questions about all of those type of things. So making yourself available. We had a concept at Walmart called coaching by walking around, and after every major change, it was really important that we had made supervisors available more than normal, walking around and talking to their people. Hey, what do you think about this? And I would say one key thing is make people feel like you're bringing them along in the process, as opposed to this is the dictator, this is what's been pushed down and you got to do this. If you can bring them along in the process and have them be part of it and still open to tweaks along the way, that's a beautiful thing. Because once, just like, I don't know, in school, a lot of times, first day of school, the teacher would be like, okay, we're going to come up with a set of rules. And they would engage the class in what those rules are. The teacher already knew sort of what the rules were going to be, but they were making the students feel like they were part of the rule-making process, and that way they were. And I think that's the same thing when you're doing change. If there's a way that there can be improvements along the way that employees are part of, and because, again, like, employees typically are your best ideas.
Oh yeah, I'm a firm believer, and we've seen it in success in a lot of different ways here. We've tried it both ways and seen different results. But I refer to it as kind of soft pitching out an idea, getting feedback, tweaking it, soft pitch again, and so I'll do that half a dozen times before we actually implement a change, because I'm wanting to say, hey, this is a direction that I think we're going, but I know that there's pitfalls in it, or there's holes that I haven't kind of thought through. Poke holes in it, tell me, and then let's fix it and go forward.
100%. I think that's the importance of, I always talk about a diverse team, and the importance of a diversity of thought is so important, because a lot of people hire robots just like themselves. That doesn't work if you're trying to get a well-rounded view. People that can see around the corner, see things from a different way. That is huge, to be able to have people that can actually feel comfortable enough to say, hey, you haven't thought about this. This is going to be really important. And
then being open to that
100%. That's a big. That's always where the pride comes in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So, in one of the things that I think is pretty notable that you've been involved with at your current role with Atrium Health is, I don't even know, and you know this, I'm sure, but how long was the organization known as Carolina's Healthcare Systems?
Yeah, so, back in almost 80 years ago, Charlotte Memorial was started, and then it had a series of small name change, things like that. So it's been Carolina's Healthcare System for a while, and everybody become accustomed to that.
Yeah, and that's like you talk about a branding change.
It was massive. It was massive, and that was a good example of not only internally, because we had done a lot of stuff to make people feel endeared to Carolina's healthcare system, not only internally but our patients, right? Yeah. And so there was that feeling of loss, actually, that was natural, and we had to acknowledge there was going to be a natural feeling of loss,
because Carolina's healthcare systems really makes you feel like it's local, it's here, and now it's not anymore.
That was the feeling, right? And some people thought that we had been bought out by Atrium Health. We simply had a name change. That was one of the things we tried to say was, while we changed our name, the heart of who we are remains the same, and our mission is still health, hope, and healing for all. And that's a really important thing. We talk about that, and it's something that teammates have. We always fall back on our mission, because we're a very mission-driven organization, and that mission is massive for pretty much all the decisions we make as well. That's why we actually changed the name. Yeah, is because when we're talking about Navicent Health, they were joining us down in Georgia. It's really hard for a system outside of the Carolinas to really say, yes, I want to be part of the Carolinas healthcare system, and that was part of it.
Yeah, it kind of limits your reach there. So I'm in the middle of a book right now called Traction. And one of the things that they talk about is that most people, it takes them 7 times to hear something before they actually engage with it. You've heard this before. What are your thoughts on that, and how have you applied that?
I think that's right. I think I don't know about the exact number, 7 or whatever. I think the concept goes back to, that's why you have to have a matrix of ways to share that information, whether it's through videos, whether it's a simple just a click of a self video that you send out to everybody. Right now, one of the things I just started actually at Atrium Health, because we're always trying to improve, is I started doing this thing called Teal Talk. Our colors are teal, and it's like real talk. So basically, I go out with my iPhone, and we film little small segments with leaders about important topics that are things that they have questions about, and they're not the easiest topics to talk about. Yeah. But I'll interview them for a quick 3-4 minutes about things, and that way we send that out to everybody, because it's another way that people can learn about stuff that they wouldn't. But that is one more mechanism other than the emails, other than the intranet, other than whatever else we're doing to make sure that that message is out there. So as many ways and different ways of communicating that same information, huge fan of.
Awesome. Chris, I want to be respectful of your time. We're well at our point. I really appreciate you coming in today. I've learned a lot. I know that it's been beneficial for our listeners and our viewers. It's something that we want to try to do every single week, is bring some valuable and tactical content for them. So I think we have done that today, and I really appreciate you coming here for that. If this is your first time listening or watching, we've got a lot of these out there. We've got 25 episodes on our podcast channel, and you can find all of that information at locdoc.net/podcast. You can subscribe there on iTunes, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, any of those outlets that you're listening to podcasts. You can subscribe to that and check that out. The full season 1 with 20 episodes are there. We're really excited. We've got a lot of great guests coming up this year. We've got a full schedule. It's being built as we speak, and we're really excited about. Our guest next week is going to be Andy Hummel from Asa Abloy and Medico, and it's going to be a really cool conversation talking about business KPIs and metrics and how they're utilizing that in their sales team. So we'll be talking with him next week. But for now, we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you next week here on The Coffee Break. To learn more about the topics discussed today and to connect with us online to hear all of the episodes available, visit locdoc.net/podcast.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
The Coffee Break Podcast is brought to you by Loc-Doc Security. We'd love to connect with you online on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Just search LOCDOCINC.